Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode number 122 of Fraternity Foodie. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like great food to bring people together. We have such a treat for you today. Today, we have with us Emily Motti, a member of Sigma Delta Tau from Oswego. She's got her Master's of Public Administration from Binghamton University. And guess what, folks? She has a TikTok following that you will not believe. This is a bona fide TikTok star right here. Emily is incredibly driven to create and maintain sustainable change through community and political action. She works diligently to amplify the voices of vulnerable communities and bring their stories to the forefront of legislation at the local, state, and national level. So not only does she have a huge social media following, but she's passionate about some amazing causes and bringing meaningful change to our country. So I absolutely love it. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That was quite the introduction.
I have a little bit of practice. You know, I'm over 120 interviews now, so I'm starting to get pretty good at this whole introduction thing. And some of the big speakers out there are like, Mike, are you free to do some intro work for me as I travel around the country?
Right.
If only I could make that work financially. We'll see what we can do. But I see you're rocking the Sig Delt letters there. I absolutely love that. The look matches, the hair matches with the letters. I mean, all of it is working for me. So kudos to you on the look today. I absolutely love it. And I love the fact that we're both from Rockland County, New York. You were going to Albertus Magnus High School, which is in Bardonia, right down the road from my home in Nanuet. I was actually over at Clarkstown South High School, which is in West Nyack, where you were hanging out. So it's just kind of funny how we kind of flip-flop that way in terms of where we were going to high school. I always thought that Rockland County was a really good place to grow up because it was the suburbs just outside of New York City, about a half hour north of New York City. So you got plenty of the culture that New York City has to offer, but we were living where there was green grass, there was parks, and I think it was a pretty easygoing kind of childhood. What was it like growing up for you in Rockland County?
Yeah, I would agree. And it's very typical of Rockland County for things to be flip-flopped. Even where I was living in my school district was flip-flopped, just because of how large it was. But all of my friends were going to Clarkstown South. Growing up in Rockland County, I was born and raised in Pearl River. So I was born in my childhood home. I am Irish and Italian, and Pearl River, where I was growing up, is a predominantly town. And so like very comfortable there, loved St. Patrick's Day coming up. Kind of feeling bad about not being in New York for the first time in my life for St. Patrick's Day. But I loved it. I'm very, although I'm not like very religious right now, I'm very appreciative of going to Albertus Magnus. My parents sent me there because of the diversity. Otherwise I would have gone to Pearl River. And I think that they were just looking for something different for me. So I loved growing up outside of Manhattan. I was always, going in there with my family. I've also got family on Long Island, so always traveling back and forth. It wasn't until recently, like this election cycle, that I looked back at Rockland and kind of realized that although it was an incredible experience growing up there, I think I made it up to seem a little bit different than it actually is in terms of political stances and political views, I guess, and lifestyle views, until I looked at an electoral map and was like, oh, we are way less liberal than I thought that we were growing up. And that could have been just because of my liberal family bubble.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I think about that a lot too, because now I'm living in Nashville in Tennessee. And so, I think when you're closer to the big city, I think you find a lot more liberal personalities that are living out there. You start getting into the rural areas. I don't have to tell you, Tennessee, a very conservative state. So depending on where you live, you really do kind of think about your bubble, the people that immediately surround you, as well as the other citizens that are around you, and what does that mean for our elected leaders, and where are people going in this area politically. So and then I think about my kids and ultimately what influences they're going to be around in school. And the fact that I moved to Tennessee, a conservative state, is that going to impact their political future and how they view what's going on in government, whether that be local, state, or national elections, right?
Mm,
So I think a lot about that and the influence about where you live on your political leanings, right?
absolutely, yeah. And
Yeah.
I went off to spend 6 years living in upstate New York, so I definitely saw how just a few hour drive could make the difference.
It makes such a huge difference. It's just it's unbelievable to me. So what made you choose Oswego for your undergraduate experience?
Yeah, two biggest reasons. One, the in-state tuition for a SUNY school was like unbeatable.
Mhm.
And two, they had a broadcasting program, which is kind of funny how it's come full circle because I didn't wind up majoring in broadcasting like I intended to. I actually switched my major, but now I'm like getting into things like social media. I've just picked up a social media management job. But that's like really why it was close enough to my parents. It was, I think, like a 6 hour drive up north. Otherwise, I was applying to a lot of private schools and got into private schools with scholarships, but they were still like double the tuition of a SUNY school.
Mhm.
And my dad said, Emily, please just apply to one SUNY school. And all my friends, I think like 15 people from my graduating class went to Oswego. So I was like, I'll just do that one. And I wound up there.
Gotcha. Yeah, we pretty much chose for the same reasons. I went to school at SUNY Buffalo, and it was really the same thing. I mean, a little bit further away, it was more like an 8-hour drive from Rockland.
Yeah.
But that being said, very cheap and a great school with a great business school. I went for a degree in accounting. So it just made sense for really all the same reasons, I think, that you chose Oswego. And there was a whole bunch of people that were going from Clarkstown South to UB. So I think that really kind of drove the decision. I wish in hindsight that I had spent more time in Buffalo before I made that decision, because the snow, the lake effect snow, oh my God, it just gets crushed in the wintertime. And I don't know if I was quite prepared for that.
And I don't think any of us were. Lake effect weather, I would walk like sideways to class with just
For
like absolutely
real.
getting slapped in the face with wind and snow.
Right. And you have to ask yourself, I mean, if your face hurts walking to class, why are you here? Like, you know what I mean? Like, my face literally hurt. I can still feel what that feels like when the ice is like hitting your cheeks walking to class, and you're like, what am I doing here? Why did I not go to school in the South or something?
Yeah, well, consider yourself lucky because as a 18 to 21-year-old sorority girl, I was walking downtown in open-toed shoes and short skirts and like in that same weather. Like I don't know what was
Right.
wrong with that we didn't, but at least I would wear a coat because I bartended at the bars that we would go to.
Nice.
So I was able to like hang up my coat and know that it was safe. But
Right.
yeah, gosh, it's like, yeah, it was wild.
I was talking to my wife about that last night. I think, the reason why we did that, and I was walking with like shorts and flip flops with my Sigma Pi pullover to the bars and things like that in the same weather. And I think we did that just because we must have been drinking a lot and we just didn't realize how cold it was. I mean, it's the only answer that I can come up with
I think that that's
because.
pretty accurate.
So, I mean, obviously, you're wearing the letters today. While you were there, you joined SIGDEL. And so, why is this organization the right organization for you? Why did you choose this particular sorority?
Yeah, so I want to be clear that before I got to school, I swore on my life I would never join a sorority. I was very anti. I would make fun of them. And then if I'd be lying if I said that a little bit didn't have to do with me trying to maybe like straighten myself out a little bit in
Mhm.
terms of like actually straightening myself out.
Right.
But I Oswego's small. We have 4 national sororities and I think like 3 local sororities. And out of the 4 of them, I think I just was really, there's no other way to describe it other than I was drawn to a lot of the older sisters that were there, that would have been there for like the year or two before they graduated. So the juniors and seniors at the time, they were just welcoming. I didn't feel the pressure to like have to be pretty. And I'm not saying that like other sororities there necessarily had that, but I just had that feeling. I didn't like feel the need to be a certain way. It was definitely the most diverse sorority, like in terms of just like taking a look at them, and the activities that they would do as well weren't so like one-sided. And as soon as I met a few girls, we kind of just like ran with it, and then it was kind of just like uphill from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that there's a really important lesson in there in that, you weren't going to Oswego thinking that you were going to go Greek. You were basically what we call a maybe joiner. You could be convinced to go Greek if you were approached the right way.
Mhm.
There are a very small select few are the always joiners that knew going into college they were going to be Greek. Maybe their parents were Greek or they had some friends already in the organization, but you fall into the majority category, which is also the category I fall into, which is the maybe joiners. And I think the lesson there is you have to go to them. They're not going to come knocking on your door because either they don't know about Greek life or they don't care. They could be convinced to join if reach them appropriately. And so that is kind of the message. You're going to have to go to them. They're not going to knock down your door. And I think a lot of fraternities and sororities get stuck in that mindset of, we're just going to wait for people to come to us. And the reality is that's not going to happen, especially when you have a lot of first gen students. You have people like me who have parents from another country. My parents are from Israel. They had no concept of what Greek life was. Okay. So there's no way I knew about it coming into it, but obviously then started working for my national organization as executive director many years later. So there are great people like you that should and belong in our sororities and our fraternities. But you got to go out and get them. You just have to, And so I want to talk a little bit about your engagement. You went to Binghamton for your Master of of Administration, and I noticed that you got very involved with the Center for Civic Engagement. You were working in voter registration and community engagement. Politics, interestingly enough, were really foreign to you growing up. But this seems to be the start of your work to amplify the voices of the vulnerable communities and then bring those stories to the forefront. So what pushes you in this direction now? It seems like now this is a big part of your life.
Yes, I am so thankful for the Center for Civic Engagement. I knew there was no way for me to be able to go to grad school without a graduate assistantship to help with tuition. And so that was one of the open positions, and probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life to apply for that position. So I helped with the volunteer placement and recruitment, and basically, I don't want to, I guess, like mentorship for those students, helping them plug into like local nonprofit organizations and figure out what they want to do and what they want to be passionate about. And then the voter registration thing was, we are all trained to do that, but I had the opportunity to do that for one whole summer at every single new student orientation. Was to basically, when you're told about like what the rec sports are and where your dining hall is going to be and all of that, I'm the person who went up for a half hour and like made you get registered to vote. So um, that I was always very passionate about it. That really drove it home. It gave me the tools I needed to like do it accurately and do it meaningfully, and like with theory behind it, I guess. What drives me now is just like I identify as an empath, and so things that affect other people that have nothing to do with me like hurt me to my core, or if it's the opposite, they make me so like joyous. So like either way, like I'm feeling what the masses are feeling, and that's always driven me to like try to care more than maybe I'm expected to.
Mm.
And so I just try to stay as informed as I possibly can. Being a member of the LGBTQ plus community like has absolutely driven that for me, because you have to be intersectional. Being someone who is assigned female at birth, you have to be intersectional with your like feminism. You have to be intersectional with like your social justice views. So a lot of that is really what played into it, and being able to hear stories from people who have different experiences for me, incredibly inspirational.
Wow, that blows me away. We need more young people like you that are getting involved. I think that's incredible. And, heading down that road, you've also endured a lot of hate speech and aggressiveness from strangers as a queer woman. So while you generally show kindness and patience, clearly, I think, for you, the times of tolerating what I would call problematic behavioral, or behavior and speech, now that time is clearly over for you. So do you feel like we are moving in the right direction now? What are your feelings on that?
In terms of just like community as a whole, with the way
Yeah,
people are treating one
yeah,
another.
yeah.
Yeah, so I would say in part yes, and I do just want to like make it very clear that I have endured hate speech and like just terrible behavior from people, but I like to make sure people know that like my whiteness comes first, and so that has always protected me even more from like hate speech and any kind of acts of violence or anything like that, because being white protects you basically. So as I have experienced those things as a queer person, it's always worse for other people. But as much as you see it getting better and improving, from like the bigotry standpoint, even like being on TikTok, it's still very much there. And a lot of it is within the community.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of work to do because, for instance, like there's so much biphobia that comes from members of the LGBTQ plus community there. And then from people outside of the community, there's just so much misunderstanding. And as things grow and more people are coming out as non-binary and people are trying to understand that and trying to understand the trans community, but there's a lot of missteps that happen throughout the way.
Mhm.
And I think that there's an expectation for the folks within the community to be the ones to educate people and to set the record straight, but that's exhausting and could be traumatic for people. And so I think the more representation we have in the media, the more like scholars that we have writing about it and providing these resources, and the more people are willing to actually go out of their way to look it up or go to a library or attend a speech or a talk, listen to a podcast, I think it'll be better. And those things are increasing in amount, I guess, and they're becoming more available. So I think it can only go up, but I don't see it completely gone yet.
Yeah. I think with this interview, I think you're really starting to take steps to get there. Like, I feel terrible that you're getting those comments on TikTok and things like that. And I think the only solution is to educate, right? Get onto podcasts, speak to crowds, and to explain what your positions are. And then I think we'll come to a level of understanding. And so I hate that you're getting those comments on TikTok. I mean, it bothers me because I think your voice needs to be amplified, not the other way around. People need to hear your message. And we're living in a very interesting time, I think, certainly with this pandemic. Over this period of isolation that we've all been experiencing, you've talked about outward appearance becoming less about appealing to the masses and more about appealing to ourselves, which really was just kind of like a moment for me where I was like, oh wow, I didn't even really think about it in that way. I think the absence of in-person work for you, that allowed you to experiment with your hair, length and color. You were trying on new clothes, and maybe you had some more downtime to read about sexuality and gender, including this crossroads of gender identity and gender expression. And to you, being non-binary is not the rejection of gender, but instead the acceptance of all facets of gender expression. So for example, you were talking about rocking a mustache and feeling really giddy when this cashier mistakes you for sir. And I was like, oh wow, okay. And so talk to us more about this, and how has this time in isolation, how has that in some ways made you healthier?
Yeah, I want to be clear that it's not an original thought, and I wish that I had the person's name who started talking about this online. But
Mhm.
basically, they started a conversation about how, with isolation, we're not clocking into work every day. We're not worried about what people are going to think about us when we're walking down the street because we're spending so much time alone. And so, normally, you're performing your gender and just your identity for the people around you, for them to either affirm you or to judge you or for you to feel like you fit in. And so when you're only by yourself, and I live alone, so it's not like I have like roommates,
Mhm.
I am now performing for myself. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. I'm spending the most time with myself. So you get to really like think introspectively about like, okay, so like not only do I get to decide how I'm presenting it, but I'm deciding how I get to perceive it as well. And so that kind of just started being a thing for me. I had never questioned gender before the pandemic. And I'm not saying it wasn't always there, because I've had conversations with my mom, who's very supportive. And she's like, yeah, thinking back to when you were a kid and you chopped all your hair off and you only wanted to shop at Zoomies and hang out with the skater boys. And I'm like, yeah, we could talk about that a different time. Um, But yeah, I mean, the performing for yourself is like something beautiful. And once again, I wish I could remember like who started that conversation, but I know a lot of people because I've spoken to a lot of people who identify as non-binary or gender fluid, and they say the same thing. It's like, I started just doing things for myself and it started to make me so much happier. It started to like click in my head and make sense. I don't feel the pressure, especially as a person who is assigned female at birth. I always feel a pressure when I was going into the office or going into school that I had to dress a certain way to be professional. And so like women have a very specific uniform for professional. It's like a cute button down blouse with slim slacks and maybe like flats, things like that. And so that's what I was wearing every single day to work, even though it's not like what I would choose to wear. But then I started working from home and I was working for a progressive political campaign. And I'm like, I'm going to wear like my t-shirt. I'm not going to put makeup on, that's for sure. Things like that. So I think it just like allowed me to be flexible. And absolutely, I had downtime to watch TV shows, listen to podcasts, read books, and just learn more about it. And it became less scary to me. I think before all of this, the idea was either that you're cisgender or that you're transgender. And I don't identify as transgender, and I would hate to ever take up that space. I've expressed that on my TikTok platform, because technically it is the umbrella that non-binary folks fall into. But once I was able to figure out like the specific, and like that's the one that makes sense for me.
Yeah, I learned so much from you, just checking out your social media account and listening to you talk. And I hope that our audience is learning as well, and they're along for this ride because you're doing so much good work here. And you suffer from mental illnesses, and I think so many of our listeners are also kind of suffering with that. So talk to us about that, and what are some self-help techniques that help you cope with mental illness?
Yeah, so I didn't realize that I was struggling with mental illness. I actually like try to phrase it striving with mental illness so that, because I'm not struggling currently, at least,
Mm-hmm.
with mental illness. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and depression when I was, I think, a sophomore in college at Oswego.
Mm-hmm.
Something had happened and I kind of had a breakdown and I had to go to the like services because I was like, something's going on, I need help. And so I started seeing someone and they were like, yep, this is what's going on. And it seems like I've probably had anxiety since I was a kid. And now it's all making sense. I never really treated it the way I probably was supposed to. When I was first diagnosed, I was prescribed Cymbalta, which did not help me. Prescriptions for mental illness, I think prescriptions in general are very specific to the person. They could be genetic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important to explore those things and talk to your doctor about it, because while that wasn't for me, I'm now on Wellbutrin for the past year, and it absolutely changed my life. So if anybody's like trying to figure out the whole like diagnosis and prescription thing, if something doesn't work out for you, like it you'll eventually find it. It's kind of a trial and error thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm on Wellbutrin. I love it. So when I talk about self-help, I always try to include the medication, because I wouldn't be able to have the motivation or desire to do self-help if I wasn't backed up by my meds. I started doing things like yoga, working out. I know those are the very typical things, but it doesn't require money to stretch. You don't even need to buy a yoga mat, but like just stretching, working on your breathing exercises. I try not to suggest any kind of self-help things that require you to like spend hundreds of dollars. Reading, doing things kind of like what I was saying with in isolation, doing things that are more for you and not for somebody else. I'm pretty codependent, and so like my attachment styles to help cope with my anxiety would to always try to get approval or acceptance or like love from like other people, and like that would keep my anxiety at bay. But then I kind of learned to do that for myself, and I'm in a much better place for it. I'm trying to think of other really of good things. I collect vinyl records. I put a record on and I just dance in my living room, and it sounds ridiculous, but it helps. Yeah, just doing things like that. I have anxiety. That's like my predominant mental illness, and there might be other things going on. I'll be getting tested, but I've recently learned that watching a TV show over and over again that you really like is something that people with anxiety do, because you know the ending and it's not going to surprise you or make you anxious. And I've always rewatched TV shows. I have so many. It's like one of my favorite things to do. I'm very passionate about TV. And so that's something that I do. And I think that that's a pretty helpful and healthy coping mechanism, as long as I don't become a complete couch potato.
It's so interesting and it's so helpful. I never really thought about it, but the reason why is because you know the ending, right? And
I
so
realize, yeah.
yeah, it's such a simple thing, but I never thought about it that way. So I learned something new every time I talk to a guest, and from you, I learned so much. And so, one of the things that I noticed about your TikTok account is that you're always talking about how we can better communicate with a friend or a partner who has anxiety. So, talk to our audience about that. How can you better communicate with a friend or partner that is in that scenario?
Yes, my favorite thing about those videos is that I post them and the captions usually like things your partner or friend with anxiety wishes they would hear from you.
Uh-huh.
And then I get a lot of different kinds of comments, but a lot of them are like how do you know to do this? Like how did you get good at that? I'm like, I'm the one that needs these things. Like this is me telling you what I wish people would say to me. Like I have anxiety. They think that I'm just like you're such a good partner to your partner with anxiety. I'm
Right.
like, I'm the partner with anxiety.
It's
Um,
me.
yeah. So I'm like, I just try to think about how partners have fallen short in the past,
Yeah.
um, whether like on purpose or completely by accident. And I try to think of like what I would want to hear now from my partner, and how I would want it to be reciprocated. And it's also not just partners, it's friendships. I've had conversations with my family members who I have an incredible family,
Mm.
but sometimes you just need to explain things. And so like if I'm oversensitive or anxious about something, I've only recently in the past year learned about like boundaries and like asking for things. And so that's important. And the other thing with those videos is like people are like, how do I send this to my boyfriend without actually sending it to him? And I'll always respond and say, send it to him. Like you don't have to have this thing be coded or like try to make it stumble onto his For You page so that he sees it. Like if it's something that you think you need, send it to him and say like, hey, this would be really helpful for me when I'm having a hard time. Because I think with mental illnesses and like any kind of marginalized group, the idea is that like, I guess I'll stick with just like mental illnesses. You're supposed to not like apologize. So like if I feel anxious, like I'm not supposed to apologize for being anxious or for like how that comes out when I'm speaking with someone or my behavior, unless I like cause damage to someone.
Mm.
Um, but I am a believer that just because you're talking about it and just because you're like saying how you feel, you're not apologizing for it. If I'm talking to someone who doesn't have anxiety, there's no way for them to know what's going on in my head. For them, there's no way that they can comprehend it. And so like unless I tell them how their actions are making me feel or how that TV show made me feel or that traffic jam made me feel, like there's no way for them to know unless I tell them. And
Mhm.
we're not like I feel like there's this idea that you're not supposed to like have to teach people, and I do understand that, but that if you want that relationship to work or you want that friendship to grow, like you have to be vulnerable and you have to let them know.
Yeah. See, that's what drives me crazy about TikTok right now. That's such a trend on TikTok. Tell me you're wealthy without telling me you're wealthy. And I'm like, no, like just have the conversation.
Yeah.
Like people can't do this whole mind reading, this ninja like thing
Mm,
that they can get into your head. Just tell them how you're feeling. You
yeah.
have to learn how to express yourself. And I feel like that's such an important part of communication. And if we can do a better job of communicating with each other and setting those boundaries and explaining like this is what I need out of a relationship, and then listening to your partner and hearing what they need out of a relationship, right?
Mhm.
So that communication skills, I think, is just so important. We got to work more on that instead of trying these like ninja, like Jedi mind tricks.
I've never done like participated in the games, like
Yeah,
the texting games or the mind games. It seems exhausting.
it
But
does.
and every gender does it and every sexuality does it. And I just will never get it. But I this was the lesson that I took from my last relationship, who I'm still on good terms with. But I was like, I never communicated what I needed. I just took their cue and followed along, and
Mhm.
it was detrimental to the relationship. And so like boundaries is something that I've learned, and communication is something that I've learned. And I'm not like perfect at it. I never want those videos to make it seem like I have like the most successful relationship in the world, because like obviously no one does.
Right.
But yeah, and those are also like ways that you could talk to yourself,
Yeah.
like not just like a partner, but you know, you can check in with yourself and reassure yourself as
Yeah.
well.
I'm really glad you said that too, because I think no relationship is perfect. I'm still working on mine, and and still trying to communicate better, even though we've been married now for 20 years. So you always have to work at it, right? I mean, it just
Yeah.
doesn't come easy, no matter what you think based on the photos that I post on Instagram or
Yeah.
whatever, right? I mean, that is only part of it. The other part of it is me working really hard to make it work.
Mhm.
So anyway, but you built up a huge following on TikTok. I mean, what's your secret to getting so many followers there?
I don't like have a secret. It was completely by accident. Anytime someone asks me about my TikTok, I say it's an accident. And like, I love that you're saying it's a lot. Like for me, yes, it is a lot of followers, but then I see people with like millions and millions, and I'm like, I'm nobody. Like you, like there's nothing going on. But I downloaded TikTok like last at the beginning of the quarantine. Me and my roommate were like at the time we're learning the renegade, like the dances.
Sure.
And then like I posted about a lamp that I made from a mannequin I got at a sporting store. Like it kind of, I just like grew followers. And to be perfectly honest, the reason that I have the growth that I do is like the lesbian content. If you look at my follower demographics, I think I have 95.5% women following me, and then like 4.5% men.
Mm.
Um, I do get the occasional message from like people saying, I am a straight man and I love your content. And I'm like, thanks, man. Like, I love it. But I've provided some sexual education tips, and I've provided the communication tips, and I talk about like lesbian content, things like that. And that is definitely where I see the growth. I posted one last night actually, and I think I gained 2,000 followers in a few hours. So I think that's like the driver of it. There's different sides to TikTok. I'm very obviously on gay TikTok,
Mhm.
and that's the only reason I started to like it, because I started off on straight TikTok. I'm like, this is not the app for me. And then I realized that there's like different realms.
Yeah.
So that's where I live, is the gay TikTok. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am a straight male and I love your content.
Yeah.
So for me, like I learn and I love to learn. I'm a lifelong
Yeah.
learner. So for me, it's incredibly helpful. So I'll just throw that out there. I'm one
Yeah.
of the men that follow you, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. So all right, so we love great food here at Fraternity Foodie. So I want to know, like, what is your favorite restaurant in Charlotte, and what do you usually order?
Yeah, because I moved down here in the pandemic, I
Uh,
don't, I take it seriously. I haven't like eaten out at a ton, but I live right around the corner from this place called Cabo Fish Taco, and
mhm.
Mexican is my favorite cuisine. And
Nice.
I just get like this. I always get chips and queso, but I get a quesadilla just with like black beans, cheese, and rice. I sit at the bar. I have a beer. Like that's the first place I ever ate in this neighborhood before I signed a lease down here. So it's like a little, and I can walk, so it's special to me. But I did want to mention that in Oswego, my favorite restaurant is La Paria, which is like a Mediterranean cuisine in an old firehouse next to the movie theater. And students never really like went there and knew about it. It was probably a little pricey for like a student budget, but my ex and I would always go there on dates. And it's to die for. It's like incredible food, and they have like a seasonal rotating menu. So if there's any people that might be in Oswego, I wanted to plug that because I think about it all the time.
Nice. Well, we have the same taste in food. I love that you gave some tips for Charlotte and the Oswego students that are out there. So you got 2 for 1 there. All right. So for all
Yeah.
of our listeners, you got an extra. Don't forget about that. So if people want to connect with you on social media, maybe they have more questions for you and they, maybe don't feel comfortable talking about it with people they know. Maybe they're like, hey, maybe Emily can answer this for me. Where should they go to connect with you?
Yeah, I certainly get that. I get a lot of it takes me a little while to get through the DMs, but yeah, so I started out on TikTok as mac and cheese please, but without I think without most of the vowels, but I did some rebranding. So it's just Emily P Motti on TikTok and on Instagram. DMs are open on both, but it's just Emily Emily P, my middle name's Patricia, and then Motti Motti. So that's how anybody will find me.
I love it. Thank you so much for spending time with us and with our audience. I think you've done a lot of good here in terms of educating. And so I wish you continued success. And if there's anything that I can do to help you, please, by all means, let me know. I'm here to support you. And I love everything that you're doing. So thank you. Thank you for your work. It's really important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. I'm so glad you reached out.
Yes. All right. Very good. To our listeners, if you like this, please like this video and share it with others that would get some benefit. And we hope to see you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Bye for now.